Today is Monday, July the 26th, and I am coming to you with today's devotional from the book of 2 Samuel. This is our first devotional from this historical book. The title of the devotional is Out of Sorrows, a New Beginning. And the scripture reading again is 2 Samuel chapters 1 and 2. Now, a little bit of the background. Our study of 1 Samuel concluded with the deaths of King Saul, his sons, and the humiliating defeat for Israel when the nation's soldiers fled the battlefield in disarray. Well, 3 days later, news of Israel's defeat and the deaths of Saul and his sons reached David in Ziklag. And that brings us to 2 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 1. Now, I've titled this particular channel, The King is Dead, an Elegy. Well, the news bearer of Saul and Jonathan's death was none other than an Amalekite soldier. He had come to David with a fabricated claim that he had slain Saul in an act of mercy and sparing the king the indignity of falling into the hands of the Philistines. Well, the truth was found in 1 Samuel chapter 31. In fact, Saul had been wounded by an arrow. He had requested that his armor bearer slay him rather than him falling into the hands of the Philistines, but the armor bearer refused, and Saul fell upon his own sword. 1 Samuel 31, verse 4. Nevertheless, to support his claim, the Amalekite had in his possessions the crown of Saul, the king, and a bracelet that David would have recognized as the fallen king's. Well, Saul had been an enemy of David for more than a decade, and nevertheless, the news of his death and the death of Jonathan moved David to mourn, weep, and fast until that evening. Rather than rejoice in the death of his enemy, David mourned, and the man who claimed to have slain the king was put to death that even. Now, verse 17 through 27 of 2 Samuel chapter 1, I've titled The Song of the Bow. It is an elegy. Now, remembering that David is a poet and a musician, David turned to poetry to express in his elegy a profound sorrow for the deaths of Saul and his son Jonathan. Now, to memorialize the household of Saul, David commanded that the words of the elegy be taught to the children of Israel. 2 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 18. Well, the concluding verses of 2 Samuel chapter 1 expresses David's grief at the loss of Jonathan, his friend and his confidant. Now, there have been some modernists who have tried to paint David's lament as a twisted validation of sodomy, but it is not. Sodomy is condemned in the Old Testament, in the book of Leviticus, the book of Deuteronomy, and in the New Testament, Romans chapter 1. And so we can be certain that it was not the sin of sodomy that would be the subject of this song that was composed to be sung by the children of Israel. Now, David's love for Jonathan was one of mutual affection and trust. And you and I know as we grow older that such a friend is rare indeed. Now, 2 Samuel chapter 2 brings us to a new stage in David's life. And I'm titling 2 Samuel 2, Two Kings and a Divided Nation. Now, with the deaths of King Saul and his sons, David recalled that he had been anointed by the prophet Samuel to succeed Saul as a king of Israel. That was in 1 Samuel chapter 16. Now, David, being the spiritual man that he was, he turned to the Lord for wisdom, and he asked two questions. The first question was this: shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? Now, remember, David had been living in the territory controlled by the Philistines. Now he is requesting, should he not move into Judah? Well, the Lord said unto David, go up. And then David asked his second question, whither shall I go? And the Lord answered him, unto Hebron. Now, Hebron was a territory in Judah, southwest, I believe, of Jerusalem. Now, with the Lord's blessing, David, his two wives, his men, and their families moved to Hebron, where he was crowned king by the men of the tribe of Judah. David immediately faced opposition from Abner. Now, who was Abner? That was Saul's nephew. Now, Abner moved to make Ishbosheth the surviving son of Saul, the king of Israel. Now, Abner's opposition to David, coupled with Ishbosheth's weak character, plunged Israel into a civil war that would last over 7 years. Now, that brings us to the description of the civil war, 2 Samuel chapter 2, verses 12 through 32. Now, there were, in the years that would follow, constant skirmishes between the men of Judah who served David as king and those who served Ishbosheth, the son of Saul. There were two strong generals that we find in 2 Samuel 2, and they incensed the conflict on both sides. Joab, David's nephew by his sister Zeruiah, and Abner, the captain of Ishbosheth's army, had become bitter enemies. Now, we find in 2 Samuel 2, verses 12 through 13, the circumstance that brought together the soldiers representing David under Joab and the soldiers that represented Ishbosheth under Abner. Well, Joab and Abner determined to set their soldiers in battle against one another. Well, the battle went badly for Abner. Abner's soldiers were defeated, and he fled the battlefield with Joab and his brothers in hot pursuit. Now, Asahel, that is the son, or the brother of Joab, the general of David's men, is described as a man light of foot, as wild as a roe. In fact, it simply means this: he was very fast, so fast that he pursued after Abner, intending to kill him. Well, Abner, now again, representing the other tribes of Israel, with Ishbosheth being the king there, Abner, desiring to spare Asahel for the respect he held for Joab, his brother, attempted to dissuade him. But we read that he refused to turn aside. Abner then stabbed Joab's brother with the blunt end of the sword, and he died. Well, with Asahel dead, Joab was in hot pursuit, desiring vengeance against Abner. Now, Abner fled to the children of Benjamin. Remember, Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin, so was Ishbosheth. So Abner flees to the safety of the children of Benjamin, and there he rallied his soldiers of the tribe of Benjamin to face Joab. Abner persuaded Joab to turn back lest he die. And Joab sounded the trumpet, and the men of David retired from the battle. Now, Joab and David's men returned to their encampment victorious, having lost only 19 men, while the tribe of Benjamin had lost 360 men. The victory, however, was a bitter one for Joab, who took up the body of his brother Asahel and buried him in the sepulchre of his father, which was in Bethlehem. As soon as he was buried, Joab returned back to David's side. Now, we're going to see in the next chapter the vengeful spirit that took hold of Joab and would ultimately overshadow his relationship with David in the years ahead. Allow me to close with an observation. Though David would wait years to reign over a united Israel, the Lord and time was on David's side. He wisely sought the Lord for wisdom and direction. And can I encourage you today, you and I would be wise to do the same thing. Wherever we find ourselves, whatever the things that we are considering possibly doing, we ought to pray and wait on the Lord's answer. The Lord bless you. I pray that this has been an encouraging study to you today. Be in the Word, study the Word, pray, and wait for the Lord to lead. What a great challenge that is. God bless and bye-bye.